All right, welcome to another episode of the Decoding Cross-Border Ecommerce podcast. Clint and Aaron here, and today we have a little more clarity around these retaliatory tariffs in Canada. So I think we're going to focus on that. But generally, the landscape, Aaron, I think you had said it well, which is Mexico is playing it a little bit more diplomatically.
Absolutely.
And Canada's putting their retaliatory tariffs in place, and in fact impacts de minimis, which we're going to talk about. And the irony of all of this is our de minimis has not changed, and so we're actually taking a little bit of the I think in e-commerce the brunt of the pain of the tariff.
Yep. Well, and to start that off, I want to talk about some of the issues up in Canada. Like, did you know they have a really bad hard water problem?
How come?
Most of the time, it's frozen. All right, so yes, let's move on. Happenings of the week, we've got the Trump tariffs on Canada. They paused the stuff on automakers. Doesn't really impact e-commerce. I don't think there's a lot of people buying cars on websites nowadays. But that's definitely something that there's definitely negotiation and posturing going on. Trudeau came out, and I mean, it was just instant. They retaliated. They're playing hardball. Mexico's playing a little more softball, saying, all right, we got some stuff coming. I think the plan is Sunday, but they're actively trying to negotiate to not have anything happen at all. So may not be a retaliation in Mexico. I believe there's some negotiations and things going on as we speak. So we'll see what happens with that. China did their retaliation as well. But the interesting thing about Canada is how, and where I think it really has a big impact on e-commerce is, as we discussed, China, not as big of a deal. That they did some retaliation. It was a lot of agriculture stuff, and China is a smaller market for a lot of U.S. retailers. Mexico is one of their smaller markets as well. Plus, they have a simplified duty and tax thing under $1,000, so may or may not apply. We'll see what kind of retaliation they come out with. We don't know. Kind of waiting and see there, but it's still not the biggest market for most e-commerce retailers. Canada's the big one.
It's a huge one. Yeah,
that's typically the number one market for U.S. retailers. So if you're a U.S. retailer selling U.S. made goods into Canada, you need to pay attention. So they immediately came out with this. The normal de minimis under USMCA from U.S. to Canada is 40 CAD for tax and 150 CAD for duty. Okay. Now, that's all under USMCA. The normal de minimis for Canada is much lower from other parts of the world. So we got an increased de minimis. Sounds great. That doesn't apply to this new, what they call surtax, which is 25% on the U.S. made goods. So this is where it gets a little weird, because we talked about the de minimis changes for the U.S. that were only in place for a matter of hours, really. And we talked about how that was a poison pill. Like, hey, if you got a Chinese made good in your shipment, everything's under, becomes over the de minimis, and they just charge tariffs on everything. Canada's different. The 40 CAD, 150 CAD tax and duty de minimis still apply. Is still in effect, but this new surtax is
seems so polite.
Is insulated.
They use the word "sir" in surtax.
They're so Canadians. Respectful up there, aren't they? But like, let me see if I can read the exact language on this here. Okay, so it says, this is a legal mumbo jumbo. Then we'll just put it in real person speak. But it says the surtax. Should I say it in a polite accent? The surtax applies to goods imported from the U.S., including those that may be eligible for the remission of customs duty, sales, and/or excise taxes under the Postal Imports Remission Order or the Courier Imports Remission Order. Did that sound pleasant?
Thank you for your cooperation, sir.
So what they're saying is, hey, the Postal Imports Remission Order and the Courier Imports Remission Order, that's their de minimis. And they're saying, yeah, we don't care about that. We're going to apply this no matter what.
So effectively, even though technically the de minimis is there, if there's a U.S. made good in the package, the de minimis for that U.S. made good is gone.
Only for the surtax.
Just the surtax, correct.
But yes. For sales tax,
that's
for
fair.
GST.
So in other words, the de minimis is there, but we're just going to give you surtax on all U.S. made goods, no matter what the value of the good is.
Yes, yes. Everything else will kick in when it needs.
So if it's $5, there's no GST, no PST, there's no duty. There's a 25% surtax on that one U.S. item.
You got it. You got it.
Okay, yeah, that's how are they even going to calculate this? I mean, I'm sure they'll figure it out.
You know what though? They've been putting a lot of effort in. You think of CARM and other things, like they're actually more prepared for this than the U.S. is. Because they've had a lower de minimis. They've been collecting on lower value shipments already.
But the calculation part is different. And the in another life, Aaron, right? I had worked at DHL and UPS. I was a sales rep. And when I would visit companies in the US that were shipping to Canada, guess what they would put where they would put all their goods were made?
China.
No. US.
That's right, they would because
they only use USMCA. So they're like, ship it from the US. It's made in the US. And this still happens a lot today where, it's a low value shipment. Just say it's made in the US and you're probably getting now it's like bad. Complete opposite. It's like, no, put China, especially if you're under 150. Actually, it doesn't even matter.
That's a good point.
So it is so everybody out there, they actually might start telling the truth of where their stuff in the U.S. of where their stuff actually is made because they're not going to get
as long as your shipments are
the
under
USMCA treatment.
Right?
CUSMA treatment for Canada.
Yes.
CUSMA.
That's the other funny thing about USMCA. Everybody has to put their country first. Americans call it USMCA. Canadians call it CUSMA, so CUSMA, and Mexico's like TMEC, which I don't know.
I'm sure it's translated in some way. Yeah, that's that's wild.
Yeah, it is. It's going to be. I don't know how long this is going to last. I mean, everyone's digging in a little bit. Trudeau says, they put a pause on the auto stuff, but he's like, as long as there's stuff in place, we're going to leave ours in place. So now it's a little bit of. A little bit of.
So if I have $100 item, right, which let's say a week ago, my stuff's made in the U.S., it would have gotten GST, PST, or QST, depending on where it's going. So maybe let's just say 10% in total. So that would have had $10 going into Canada. Now with a US made item, there's going to be $10, plus there's going to be another $25 on top of that. So it's going to be $35 for the import for the Canadian instead of the $10.
Yep.
That's like, that's a 30-40% increase.
There's really,
I'm sorry. 300.
Most of these goods really don't have, actually all of them, because the way they define it as goods that would be qualify for USMCA or CUSMA. So they really don't have duty typically because of the trade agreement. So now you're just throwing in this 25% on top of like what was
surtax.
Normally really cheap is now going to become a lot more expensive. So, and so the question comes in, what kind of goods are impacted, right?
Yeah. What types of because it's not goods. It's not all goods that are made in the U.S. right now. Now it's like what types of goods, because Trudeau did say it was going to apply to
30 billion in goods.
Billion.
Yep, says effective March 4th, the government of Canada is imposing 25% tariffs on 30 billion in goods and imported from the United States. And then it goes on to qualify some stuff about determination of country of origin for the purposes of marking goods for CUSMA regulations. So. But then it lists a whole bunch of HS codes that make up that $30 billion. And then in 21 days, they're going to increase the list. But this stuff's very relevant for e-commerce. As I go through it, there's a bunch of things like poultry and meat and stuff that's really not e-commerce per se. But then you get into like supplements. There's a lot of companies that do that. Yep. And then you start getting into the HS codes for like handbags. And then all the chapter 61, 62, that's all of your apparel. So it's impacting all of that. Now, I don't know how much apparel is actually made in the U.S. nowadays, but there's a lot of consumer goods on this. And they've targeted the alcohol industry. In fact, you see a lot of companies in Canada boycotting American alcohol and pulling them off the shelves and stuff. You see news articles about that. So it's getting a little ugly right now, but there's a beauty and cosmetic HS codes on here, but there's a whole list of
fashion industry codes. Generally is being hit.
Yeah. So very relevant for your shipments going to Canada. And so
if it's made in the US.
Yep.
And if it's not, you're for now, you're somewhat clear going into
it'll be
to Canada until it goes up and over the de minimis, and then you have your normal tariff and duty.
That's business as usual. Yep. So super relevant for e-commerce merchants selling U.S. made goods. A lot of impact on those consumer goods. This is already in effect now. Just trying to interpret it and understand it. Everything's happening so fast. That's where we want to jump on and kind of walk through the nuts and bolts of how this thing actually works operationally.
Yeah, that's wild. Okay, kind of in a parting thing, Aaron. How soon do you think the U.S. actually gets their act together and does drop the de minimis?
Well, let's see. So Larry, who's doing all the clearance with his paper book, right? That's kind of where we're at. And they got to put a whole system in place. I don't know, because they were waiting on the Secretary of Commerce. And when they actually called that out, the Secretary of Commerce actually wasn't in place and functioning yet. He is now.
Do you think he's gotten the memo that he's the one that decides when the systems are in place?
I hope it was in his job description.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Like, honestly, I don't know how fast they're going to move, but I know there's going to be a ton of pressure, so it's going to be faster than ever before. Yeah. On something like this.
Well, I prefer not to predict, because you just cannot predict day to day what's going to happen with the tariffs right now. So though I'm going to try. I think that it's I don't think I think everything will end up just over the next week or two kind of go away on both sides. And the de minimis in general will get lowered over the next 6 months. It's kind of my guess.
Do you think the de minimis, do you think all of the trade war stuff's just going to kind of bubble up and then settle?
I think so. But
then do you think the de minimis has been talked about?
Yeah, I think de minimis
forever.
In general will get taken care of for sure.
Do you think through an executive order or will it go through legislation?
I don't know if it can happen through an executive order. I think it has to go through legislation. But you know what? Who knows? You throw enough executive orders out there and maybe what slips through.
It's part of the ride right now.
Okay. Well, I'm sure we'll be back next week with some more.
Thanks, Clint.
All right. Thanks, Aaron.